I'm Andy Murray, the Executive Director of the Major Projects Association, and I'm pleased to introduce a series of roundtable discussions on why race matters in the world of major projects. This first session is all about hearing from project professionals regarding their experiences, and we'll be discussing what can be done as individuals to bring about change generally. In one of our other sessions, we'll also be exploring what can be done on major projects more specifically. Facilitating today's discussion is Gary Young. Gary is a sociology professor from the University of Manchester, as well as being an author, broadcaster, and journalist, having previously been editor-at-large for The Guardian. In 2020, Gary was included in the top 100 Black Britons and for 2 years running has been cited by Powerlist as being one of the most influential people in the UK from African or African Caribbean descent. Now, there's another reason why Gary is facilitating our discussion in addition to his impressive credentials. Gary and I grew up in the same town at the same time and went to the same school, so our backgrounds are pretty similar except that Gary is black and I'm not. In a later podcast in this series, Gary and I will be exploring our experiences from growing up and entering the world of work and how they differed based on race. For now, I'd like to hand over to Gary to get this session started. Gary, a very warm welcome and over to you.
Thanks, Randy. So I'm joined here today by June Reed, IJ Samuel, and Aaron Matthew, all of whom work on and in major projects around the country and elsewhere. And I'm going to be talking to them about their experiences as Black people in general in their work. And how their race has affected their ability to do their work. I'm going to start by talking to IJ and just IJ asking you just to introduce yourself briefly and give us a sense of your experiences in major works.
Thanks, Gary. Thanks, Andy. It's an honor to be on this platform today, sharing my journey, my experiences on major projects with everyone here today. So really pleased about that. So a bit of background about me. I'm IJ Samuel. I'm a director with Turner & Townsend, and I've been on major projects for over 15 years now. Some of you may know that I started my career within engineering as a control systems engineer. Started my career back in Nigeria, and after I finished university, did a project on SCADA systems for about 2 years there. I decided to come to the UK to do my master's program. So that was kind of my journey coming over to the UK. In that time, finished my master's degree, still worked within control systems engineering in oil and gas projects at the time. One of the key things really through my professional journey, and in that time anyway, I switched into project controls and program management as well. But the key thing for me really in all of the different projects I've done, be it from gas gathering facilities or power plants and utilities, or onto High Speed 2 or Heathrow Airport and all of these major projects, one thing that's remained consistent for me really is for me, it's been my drive in how far I want to go in my career journey. And I'll touch on that drive a little bit later. But pretty much in terms of how I've gotten to where I am today. I'm a mom, also a mother of 2 kids. And at some point earlier on in my career, when I went off on maternity to have my first child, at the time, I was within oil and gas projects at the time, came back from maternity leave. And one of the key things really, I suppose I wear 2 hats on this platform today, being a woman in construction, in built environment, on major projects, and also being a Black woman in the same environment. What that meant was for me coming back from maternity leave at the time, I was told I couldn't be put onto a major project or a serious project for that matter. The key thing that the penny dropped for me, meaning, was that because I'm a woman, or was that because I'm a Black woman, or was that because my capabilities were thought not to be at the same level before I went off on maternity leave? I've come back full time. Why couldn't I go back onto a major project? And those were sort of the barriers that shaped me to start thinking, No one else should go through the same path that I've gone through. No one else should experience this within construction, within major projects. It's just not acceptable. And I'm sure we would unpack a few of the conversations later on, but that kind of sparked a big interest in me in terms of how do I be a voice? How do I stand up for others, as well as navigating my own ambitions, my own career journey. And since then, a lot of things have happened, and I'll unpack that later on as we go. But that's kind of a bit of a history and journey about how I got here today.
Thank you, Ajay. June, could you share just a little bit of how you got here?
Thank you, Gary. And like IJ, great honour to be part of this discussion this afternoon. So I started out in local government in 1989, primarily as an arts officer, and then programming, but also then doing much more strategic work. And in the late 80s, had the opportunity to work on my first single regeneration budget programme in Southwest London, and then went to Southeast London to do a programme that was £25 million of a single regeneration budget. That programme came to an end, and I was placed on the redeployment list. So one of the opportunities that came up was to work in the newly established corporate programme office, which was overseeing and developing the major projects for that particular council in South East London, which included building schools for the future, the development of free service centres, and a number of other projects. When I joined that department, I was the only person who was Black at that time, and I was, I think, the second or third woman. So by giving me the opportunity to join that corporate office, I was solving their problem in that I was addressing the absence of someone of colour or a Black person being in that department, and I was adding to the number of women that was in that department at the time. However, I was the only person who had to come into that office and be put on a trial period. And in fact, the trial period was then extended. My grade, I came in on the same grade as my previous role, where others in that department, their grades went up, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 times up the scale. The other thing that I experienced, I was treated as the office junior, although I was older, which is not the main consideration, but I certainly, as I said, have been running a major regeneration scheme at the time that £25 million, which most of the people there hadn't had that responsibility. I was treated as the office junior, and I was allocated tasks that the programme office saw as less high profile and therefore subject to less risk. So I was allocated risk management to oversee the risk management for the overall programme office, as well as reviewing the risk management procedures in each of the major programmes and projects. I undertook quality reviews of the individual projects and programmes, and also had to prepare the periodic programme update reports for the programme office board. I then had the opportunity to work with Andy and other colleagues on a Pan-London programme, which basically created a bespoke programme management tool for initially the 33 London councils in London, but it got extended to other councils and authorities outside of London. A very high profile project, but because colleagues at the time didn't respect programme and project management in terms of Prince2 and MSP, I wasn't given, the project wasn't seen as valuable and as important as it should have been, and therefore I was undermined, and subsequently I was bullied, in fact, and had the support of Andy and other colleagues from the other local authorities, but it was a really soul-destroying experience. But I'm a bit like IJ, I'm very tenacious. I strongly believed in the programme. it was excellence in project and program management. I was committed to it, and I just had to harness the support of other colleagues, as I mentioned, and the likes of Andy. What I want to say was that in speaking with colleagues ahead of today, colleagues on this video, I hadn't realised that having experienced this in 2006 through to 2009, when I moved into customer services as a senior manager, how much it still affected me. I, at the time, feared that I would lose my job because I was being bullied. I experienced low self-esteem, lack of self-belief. And when I transitioned into a senior management role within customer service, I basically had to be really supported by my new assistant director to have self-belief, to, lead as a manager, basically. And I think I can't estimate the long-term damage that experience had on me. So that's why I welcome the opportunity to share not only just the experience, but that when these things happen to you, how, what it can do long-term in terms of damage. I don't know, Andy, if you wanted to comment on what I've just said, have been someone that worked with me at that time.
Yeah, I mean, first thing I would like to say to you is you hit it really well. Although you sort of reached out for support, from others, it wasn't. You didn't reach out saying, "I've got this issue because of race." I think when you came to me, it was perceived, portrayed as a stakeholder engagement issue, and we worked around it. But you didn't say it was a race issue. We were aware there was an issue, but not, that was the root cause of it. And I think something perhaps for us to explore through this conversation and later about how we can, expose these issues and call them out when we see them, rather than not so much as hiding it, but working through it, which is what actually happened, wasn't it, Jim? So you just plowed through it rather than called it out.
I think the lesson I learned from that was that I would never allow myself to be bullied again. And I will call it out. I think you, as a lone Black person at the time, although subsequently an assistant director joined the department, and he saw what was going on, which is why he asked me to join him when the program office was winding down. Yeah, I've actually, when I thought about it, I've been bullied in a couple of other local government positions that were not program related, and having reflected on that, that will never happen to me again. In fact, in the current job that I'm in, I had a bit of an issue with a manager, and he didn't do it intentionally. He was unaware of what he was doing, but I called it out to his manager, and it got dealt with. And subsequently, our relationship is a lot better. So I carry forward the learning that, yeah, I will call it out and I will not tolerate it. And if I need to leave, I'll leave. I won't sit there and be a victim. That's not going to happen again to me.
Thank you, June. Thank you for the testimony. We're going to come back to those themes presently. I just want to introduce Aaron, and Aaron, tell us a bit about yourself and how you got here.
So thanks first for inviting me to this conversation. My name is Aaron Matthew. I'm a project manager at Tenner & Townsend, and my job is making stations more inclusive in the Southwest. So that's my role as a project manager. So I guess talking about race in my career, I'm quite early on in my career. I'm only 6 or 7 years in. So I guess I'm gonna kind of go back to the beginning and talk a little bit about school, university, and getting into the project management, civil engineering space in the first place. I guess in school, there was always a sense that engineering was quite white-dominated industry. It was quite rough and a little bit, and I was kind of actively told that it'd be a difficult industry to go into, and kind of avoided, told not to get into that industry, and there might be better industries suited to to me. And I think a part of that was the fact that I am brown. I think going to university, my education, was fantastic, but I did struggle to, get a job. And recently, I think the Royal Academy of Engineers put a statement out saying that race is the biggest factor to graduates getting jobs in the industry. So that kind of resonated with me. And then I guess in the industry now that I'm here, something that's kind of always a bit puzzled me is how little or how completely that we don't speak about race in our industry. I've gone to a lot of lectures where I'm really interested in the history side of engineering, and I think the Victorian engineers is a key aspect of our identity as project managers and civil engineers in the UK. But there was very little, if anything, said about empire, and nothing said about how infrastructure was a tool for empire building and didn't benefit the British Empire and colonies. And I think that story is a little bit missing from our education as engineers and project managers. And I guess it kind of leads up to last year with the biggest civil rights movement in history, and the fact that a lot of industries, a lot of companies I was friends I was speaking to just felt that their companies were really not talking about race at all and not comfortable about that. And that resonated with me because my industry is inclusive design, so trying to make spaces more accessible. And one of the key things that is preventing that is that we're unable to talk about disabilities. And I think race is kind of has that kind of same issue where as Brits, we are very uncomfortable about talking about that. And I think that really has not helped us as an industry progress as fast as we maybe should have.
Thank you, Aaron. And I want to start here where you finish, because these conversations, I think I'm right here, Andy, were kind of prompted by that kind of that explosion of energy that took place in June 2020 over Black Lives Matter. And I imagine that moment kind of pollinated in different ways in different workplaces. And so I kind of, with the exception of Aaron, who's relatively new to the industry, both IJ and June, and Andy actually, have been in the industry for a while. Is this the first time that you've been able to talk about this? Because obviously racism wasn't invented last year. The experiences that both IJ and June talked about are from a while ago. Even Aaron's kind of like, well, I don't know if you should go into that field, maybe this field. It's not new. And yet I wonder whether these conversations that we are having are new, because if they are, then they speak to a long-standing period in which people, and here both June and IJ's testimony kind of bears this out, people felt isolated and didn't know who to talk to and didn't even know whether the subject would find a home. Now, I might be wrong. There may have been many sessions about this. This may be something that you talk about in major projects a lot, but either IJ or June or Andy, actually, because you've all been in the industry for a while, I'd be interested to hear your views on that.
This is the first time that I've spoken about the issues of race and project and program management. And in fact, when Andy and Bannon contacted me to talk about it, I got very animated and I got very enthused about it because of it being the first time. And as I was speaking, things were kind of rushing into my head and just exploding out. I don't know, Andy, if you remember that conversation. I was just like, as we started talking, I just kind of went into overdrive, and because there was just so many things that their approach to me and their questions of me were raised. So no, Gary, this is the first time that I've certainly had an opportunity to speak about race, and what the Excellence in Project and Programme Management programme enabled me was to work with a number of colleagues who'd been in project and programme management across London. That's why I really enjoyed doing that work. I was meeting with colleagues from, let's say, other authorities, from colleagues outside of London. We were meeting with senior responsible owners. You know, these were people that were assistant director level. And as part of taking the EPPM program, as it was called, forward, race never came up, Andy, did it? It was never really an issue. But clearly, I believe, and we're talking about the early 2000s, it probably was an issue, but we were focused on this developing this tool that was a bespoke tool. We were focused on delivering bespoke training. But I think people just saw themselves as professionals, were committed to projects and programme management. This was a great opportunity. It was funded and time limited, so we got on with the job. But I'm sure, had Black Lives Matter and George Floyd had happened then, as well as maybe the killings and abuse that has happened in the UK for decades, you know, we're going back to the 70s, in fact, in terms of what was happening here, and the killings in police custody that have happened here and been raised, but kind of ignored prior to Black Lives Matters, then it would have come out, I think. But it's I welcome the Major Projects Group raising it, because I think that it's important. And if myself, IJ, and Aaron have experienced it, then there are other professionals who definitely must be experienced it or have experienced it.
I just want to interject very quickly to say that it was in the early 2000s, then there had been the Macpherson report, which spoke about institutionalized racism, which nobody, to my mind, thought stopped to the police. So certainly in the media, people kind of started talking about institutional racism. 1999, the year the Macpherson report came out, that's the year I got my column. That's the year Yasmin Alibhai-Brown got her column. That's the year Steve McQueen won the Turner Prize. That was the year that kind of White Teeth came out. Now, those things are contextual. They're not, well, some of them are causal, actually, and some of them are contextual. But it would appear that kind of when it came to major projects, what was actually kind of in some ways a bit of an earthquake in British racial thinking, and Stephen Lawrence's death happened here as opposed to George Floyd's death, which happened several thousand miles away. Sounds like the world of major projects, it didn't really have much of an much of an impact. But I want to move on, either Andy or IJ. IJ.
Yes. So just off the back of that, what you said about Stephen Lawrence happened right in our doorsteps here. It still did not cause that quake to happen. And going back to your earlier question about, is this the first time we're having these conversations, especially on major projects or on programs as well? There is something that happens that causes a global movement. And when it becomes a global movement, it gets the attention of the world, and then it gets attention of individuals. And if you miss that moment, then your business will be left behind pretty much. I think this is where it's catching on with major projects. It's not, when we talk about Stephen Lawrence, it was a big deal in the UK. Over the years, you know, the fight for justice across with the family and so many supporters that have been on that journey. It's been a big movement within the UK, but it did not shake major projects in that sense of causing a revolution, if I may put it that way. What we found is this the first time I'm having this conversation on major projects? No, but did George Floyd's death make that even quicker, or make it louder, or raise our voices louder? The answer is yes. Did it get the attention of major projects? I'm not, when I say major projects, I'm not only referring to what Andy and his team are doing. I'm talking about major projects and programs across the UK. Yes, it got the attention of business leaders in that sense. So in 2019, some of you may be aware of Black Professionals in Construction started a movement or a network, just bringing Black professionals together, in the sense that, where are these people? Who are these people? We're not seeing that leadership across major projects or across the industry within construction. So that was pretty much how that network started. And then very quickly, what we began to hear from leaders was around, well, we don't know where these people are. We don't have the Black talents, or Asian talents, or minority talents. We don't know where to find them. And we're thinking, that must be a joke. Come on, you're looking at us here, right? So the power of that network, what that meant was, if we come together as a collective within construction, we work within the construction industry, built environment, major projects, we understand the landscape. We are the talents in that space. So when you're saying, where are these people? We point back to ourselves. Here we are as a network. This is who we are. However, when you look at the stats, I don't need to go into any stats here. You can count with your fingers. Name any major project across the UK where you can talk about leadership. In that space, you can count with your fingers how many Black directors, how many Black exec, or at CEO level. I'm talking about senior leadership. So over the years, we start getting diversity increasing a little bit, percentage-wise. There's different stats out there in terms of the percentage of Black, Asian, minority professionals within construction. But when you talk about that diversity and inclusion at leadership, yours truly haven't got it in statistics that we can say that we're doing the right thing from that perspective. So back to the conversation, are we leveraging what's happened to George Floyd to get the businesses to listen? It's the right opportunity for businesses to do the right thing. And I'm really pleased about what Andy have called today in terms of this platform, where we're using it to amplify the voices of the professionals working within major projects within the industry to say, how can we help you, Andy? How can we help major projects to be the solution that we're after? I mean, we can go through a long list of our personal experiences. What I carry is beyond my experiences. I carry the voice of many Black women. I carry the voice of many women within engineering. When we talk about diversity, it's not only about gender diversity. It's not only about racial diversity. It's not only about LGBT or diversibility. It's about the collective. But back to the subject at hand here, when it comes to race, it's very uncomfortable conversations for many businesses. And we want to be that voice that will be able to channel it in the right direction to say, this is the solution that we can bring to the table. We want to see diversity. We want to see inclusion across all levels of the business on major projects. That's where my heart is.
Sorry, is there something you want to add, Andy?
Yeah, it's really interesting, and it's sort of insightful, Gary, for you to bring that out in terms of the conversation that we're having, because the Major Projects Association itself, through the sort of the passion and drive of Manon Bradley, has been sort of leading on EDI matters for some time. But when we reflect of what's going on in the wider landscape of major projects, I think in EDI, I think the focus has been on diversity, but not on equality and inclusion. So there's been baby steps, but and again, when I reflect, I think there's a lot of it's been, as I suspect, sort of project and program managers in us. It's been quite structural in terms of things like unconscious bias training and focusing on recruitment and so on. It's not been what we're doing now, which is having conversations and having difficult conversations, and we need to make it a lot more people-centric than perhaps what we've done to date. So it's hopefully the start of different approaches that we can take to build on this.
I just like to add something small to this, is that I guess there's many facets to the impact of not talking about race in the industry. And I think there's sometimes not an awareness by the wider industry that there is an issue. For me, you know, the iceberg is that, you know, our companies and our businesses is not inclusive, but there's also that element of what we're building is that inclusive in terms of race, and then is our education inclusive of the shared histories of the people in this country. So I think this is a multifaceted, and for me there's those three kind of big hitters that we're maybe not even aware of.
Thank you, Aaron. I want to touch on a point that June made explicitly, and IJ, June made explicitly and IJ made implicitly, which I think, given Aaron, your stage in your career, I'd be interested to know where you relate to it, which is doubt. That things happen at work. White people are bullied at work. Men can be bullied at work. You can come back to work and find that, you know, your face no longer fits. And so there is this challenge, isn't there, when it comes to issues of race and gender, which cannot always, Black women aren't Black sometimes and women other times. They're Black women all the time. And so it's kind of impossible to kind of unravel that. But that moments where you think, is this just me? Is it my work? As Ajay is, you know, do they just not consider me good enough? Is it because I've just come back after having a baby? Is it because I'm a Black woman who's come back? And you don't know. And that leads to the kind of doubt that June was talking about, where she starts to doubt herself, and her self-esteem goes down, her confidence goes down. And I just want to rest a minute on that issue of that moment, really, of doubt, that moment at which something happens and it's left to you usually entirely to unravel it and work out what's going on here. Why has this happened to me? So, I mean, if I start with IJ, because there is that moment where you come back to work, having been away from maternity leave, and you're like, what's going on? And I think it's just worth teasing that out a little bit, because in that moment, it's quite lonely. It's in your head, and you're kind of casting around looking for people to talk to, but maybe everybody thinks this about you, or maybe not. Anyway, IJ.
Yes, Gary, it's interesting you say that, because you come back into work. So I came back into work, and I'm thinking, I've come back from, I think it was about 7 months off I had. It wasn't even like a full year off, to say you've been away for a whole year kind of thing. And then when I got told I could not be put onto a serious project, I've worked on major projects for pretty much most of my career. And that was quite humiliating in that sense. And then you talk about self-doubt. Is it because I'm not good enough anymore? And you hear the stories about, well, when you come back from maternity leave, you've got baby brains, and you've got also, people make reference to all sorts. And thinking about it, I refuse to accept the baby brain thing now. At the time, I just put it down to baby brains. I just put it down to, I could have been out of work for caring for an older family member. I could have been out of work for sick reasons, or anything else could have taken me out of work. And the reality check is, how do we, on major projects, make the environment conducive to support people coming back into work? It shouldn't be a case where you're left wondering. And touch wood, things have gotten better on a number of projects or businesses in my time from 2009, when I went off on my first maternity leave. Having said that, the gap is still there. When else have I found myself doubting myself and my capabilities? So one thing was about when the tire hit the road, rubber hit the road, regarding my coming back from work from maternity. But also my accent was another one that people took the mickey, if I may say. They just teased my accent to death. I know that people have different accents even within the UK, but just saying, I came over from Nigeria, and we grew up speaking English. And then when I arrive here, people are like, is that English you're speaking? I mean, that's rude to your face. And you can pack that into your shell and begin to think about, is it me? Am I not good enough? And all of that. And you do have people who, there are people who are on the path. I had people who made sure that they took me on the journey to support me on my journey, but there were other people still on major projects who took it upon themselves to just tease the living daylight out of me. I don't know what satisfaction they got out of that. But back to your point, Gary, when you start having those doubts, where do you go? Because some of it, you might say there's a HR issue here. Some of it is not just a plain HR issue. It's just, where do you go with that? It's not, if you haven't got that platform, if you haven't got that right support, if you haven't got the business who is listening, you've got nowhere to take that to. You can raise all the HR issue as you like, but it's going to be halfway house. It's not really one of those proper, I don't know even what to categorize it into. So for me, really, I'm one of those where growing up, my mother put it into us, you don't let anything stop you. You are the only one that can stop yourself. So from that perspective, when all of that kept coming back in terms of self-doubt, my accent, am I capable of major projects, I took it upon myself and joined Toastmasters. And that's where I worked on my public speaking skills. And I took that, for me, I take any obstacle or any limitation, I take that as a strength. How can I make a strength out of it? And I suppose if you haven't got that within you, where you can see how you can turn around anything into a strength, you would probably stay longer in your shell and not have anywhere to take it to. I'm privileged to be working for a business now that they are listening. We've had similar conversation that we're having today. We've had a number of roundtables. They are listening. They want to do the right thing. We're putting measures in place to do the right thing. And that's where we need to be as major projects. We just need more businesses to listen, to provide a home or a platform for people to have somewhere to actually take their concerns to. And sorry, Gary, if I may just use this analogy, for mental health, over the years, it's been on the rise. The stats are showing us, even with lockdown, it even tripled or quadrupled, or whatever the stats are showing now for mental health. And on most of the major projects I've been on, now you begin to see what we call mental health first aiders. Right? There's some training they put in place. You have champions, you have first aiders. There are other channels that provide support for people to take these things to beyond just going to their GP. We haven't got anything like this for race at the moment. Not that I'm aware of. There are uncomfortable conversations. There are networks that people have at work or on major projects, but we haven't got anything that provides that level of support that we've given to mental health. So the question is, are we listening enough to provide the right support and solution for our people on major projects?
So before I bring you in, June, I do want to say, and you'll have the chance to come back at this at some point, IJ, but that there is something about, I was raised in the same way, more or less, that like, my mum's thing was, if you have a problem at school, it's your problem, deal with it, come over it. I don't want you coming home and saying the world done me bad. I want you to come home and say how you dealt with it. The trouble with that, though, is that it puts an awful lot of pressure and emphasis on me as a child, as an adult, to kind of solve this problem, which actually kind of makes it lonelier. And it means, on the one hand, that it's teaching you to navigate racism, but it's never actually about challenging racism. It's just about finding a way to kind of get through this awful system. And there's the psychic penalty for that, of kind of I'm going to put my head down and just kind of muscle through. It's their problem, it's not my problem, is that you take the whole problem on for yourself, and there's nowhere to go with it, because we've been raised to kind of toughen our exterior, thicken our skin, and walk through the fire, and the fire gets hotter and hotter, and we keep going. Sorry, talk to us about your moment of doubt.
Before I go on to that, I'm glad you made that point, because I agree with AJ, and I think that's one option, is looking to yourself. But I'm also glad you made that point about the burden, because I was thinking about what I learned from my experience, and also then how I dealt with it once I decided not to be a victim. So what I did was, as I mentioned, I drew on the other peers within the projects, the Excellence in Project and Programme Management Steering Group, and Andy, and they were so supportive. They made me understand that it wasn't me. They were very angry for the way I was being treated, but they also helped me in terms of how they responded to my managers and senior managers within that department. That was number one. I also spoke to the assistant chief executive for the local authority that I was working for at the time, and he gave me good guidance and helped me to put together a written response, which when I presented that to my manager and his manager, they then backed off. But thirdly, I would say one of the important things in terms of solutions is about looking at senior Black and brown leaders who can become mentors, I think, because they would have experienced to some degree, if they're racially aware, they're not always racially aware, but they would have experienced to some degree what people like myself, IJ and Aaron have experienced. But that's one of the things I would suggest. It's not the only things. At the end of the day, it is about these organisations, one, having awareness raised with our experiences and the unconscious bias, etc. And I really echo what IJ was saying about the need for solutions that are organisational and structural. And the point that IJ made about the global impact and why people have now sat up in their chairs and are taking more notice, because before there was Stephen Lawrence, there was Roland Adams. And no one talks about Roland Adams, although he was murdered well before Stephen. And I think around the same time, there was an Asian young man, I think in Thamesmead, that was also killed, called Rohit Dougal. No one talks about him. So, it was the global impact, and the fact that people actually, like myself, could sit in our homes in Southeast London and see George Floyd being killed. Because again, as you were saying, Gary, George Floyd wasn't the first to be killed by police and by others, but I think the difference was we all had the opportunity to see it because of the video the young lady took. We were in our homes, in our armchairs, we were able to watch it, and then people uprose. And I think that is the difference, the global impact. But can you repeat the question you asked me before I started responding to IJ and yourself?
I was asking what was your moment of doubt, if you can describe.
Yeah, the moment of doubt. I think actually it was, the first thing I felt was fear rather than doubt. So there was two things. Before the bullying started, yes, I was very nervy. I didn't present in the programme office meetings or in the presentation to the boards as confident and assured. When I spoke to individual colleagues outside of the programme office, when I spoke to projects and programme managers within the programme, i.e. the people outside of my immediate programme office, I came over as confident. And I just basically worked really hard to ensure that I understood what my responsibility was, how I was going to execute my responsibilities. And I'm a perfectionist, and it's only in the last 5 or so years that I've realized that. So everything I did, I worked really hard and put in the extra hours to deliver quality work. So that's how I dealt with the doubt. But then I went on to, when the bullying kicked in, that's when fear kicked in, because I really thought I was going to lose my job. At the time, I was a single parent with a primary school age child. So, you know, I physically lost weight. And that's when I kind of had to, as in talking to people who were supporting me, including a senior leader, as I said, I realized I had to stand up for myself. And as I said, I prepared a draft response to the intimidation and the bullying. And as I said, the result was that they backed off. Yeah, that's why I think, as I said, it's important for me to remember that lesson of not allowing myself to be a victim and drawing on the support of others, either peers or other senior leaders.
Thank you. I mean, Aaron, you're very early in your career, and so I don't know if you've had that moment in that sense, but I would imagine that you have a sense of what that is. And I'm just wondering how you think about hearing some of your older colleagues talk. Aaron, having listened to IJ and June's experiences, I'm just wondering what you make of those. And if you were in a moment of doubt now, coming into the profession a bit later than they did, would you know where to go? Would you know what to do?
So I've definitely had that moment of doubt. And it was around a couple of years ago when the Rhodes Must Fall movement happened. So this was the discussion on whether a historic building should be modified to take down the statue of a slaver. And I thought it was a fantastic discussion that the industry, especially as engineers and major projects who, you know, interface with historical buildings, should talk about. And the moment of doubt came for me is when I engaged with the institution, with so many professionals who said, "Don't speak about this. It's not a great topic. We're not ready to talk about it. Let's just focus on, you know, diversity in the workplace. This is not the topic. This is not the time." I was regularly told this.
Wanting non-white people, that diversity is not just about looking different, it's about acting different. It's about hearing and understanding new voices. Otherwise, you swap equal opportunities for photo opportunities, I think. If you change the way an organization looks, but then it acts in exactly the same way. And so when you bring new people in, new kinds of people in, then it is gonna change things. And sometimes people act as though it shouldn't change anything, but actually it's good, I think, that it changes things. And that kind of, you know, to be on a very basic level, if you have more women working in your organization, you're gonna have to kind of deal with the toilet situation, or you're gonna have a big chunk of your staff queuing up the whole time when they should be working. And so there is, in different ways, in different industries, a change that comes when you change the people that you're working with and when you give them a voice. When people are, well, you don't give them a voice because they've always had a voice. But when people's voices are heard, then comes the challenge of listening. And I just wonder if you've had some experience of that. Okay, I'm here. I feel like I'm generally respected. This is not an act of racism insofar as denying me this job or that job, but I'm not being heard. I'm raising an issue and it's not being heard. And the issue might be about race. It might be about the food that's served in the canteen, or about the holidays that are allowed for one religion but not another. It could be a range of things, but I'm just wondering if that has been an experience in major projects for you. June.
It didn't happen in terms of major projects, ironically, but prior to being deployed to the major programs and projects office, I had worked for the directorate, where the head of the major projects and programs corporate office had been the director. So he knew me. And it was clear to me because of the way I was, I think I came over professionally. You can hear from my accent that I speak in a way that doesn't have IJ's accent or any other accent. I'm clearly a Londoner, and I speak the Queen's English, so I don't scare people. They won't necessarily ridicule me. That they found me acceptable. So often I was the person who they put on to recruitment panels because I made up the quota in terms of being black and a woman. When there was an issue with a member of staff who was a black woman, they spoke to me about that, about how I could support that person to protect them in a way. But it was interesting. But when it came to the program and project environment, major projects and programs environment, I wasn't afforded the same respect. And even when I, along with my peers in that office, qualified as a Prince 2 practitioner and an MSP, managing successful programs practitioner, I still wasn't regarded as having any, being less than the junior, the junior in the office. Well, I'd also like to say there were two issues around race and gender, and I kind of alluded to this earlier. The fact that someone's black or of colour doesn't mean that they're politically aware and see race or racism as an issue. That kind of, I've never experienced racism, not sure what planet you've been on, that can still persist and or does persist. So, AKA the Tony Sewell report, where, you had these panel members on who put their names to this, some of who then wanted to walk away from it, including the Prime Minister. But, it was a self-serving role that they played on that inquiry, and hence all the backlash, because I don't know how they could have come up with those recommendations. There's allegations that the recommendations were written by the Prime Minister, blah, 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 blah. But, from over a year ago, when Sewell was appointed to that, there was uproar about him being appointed to that leadership role on that, and also concerns raised about some of the panel members. So, that's a case in point as to one needs to go beyond being black or being of colour. It's, are you politically aware? Are you engaged? Are you fit enough to stand up and see the issues? And I come back to AJ, also willing to look at solutions and not wanting to believe, I'm okay, Jack. Back to the 70s Thatcher era, where as individuals, you pulled yourself up by the bootstraps and you were cool. If everybody sort of plays cricket by the rules and, sorts themselves out and makes themselves fit for purpose, then it's all cool and dandy. Sorry, Gary, repeat that last point you made.
No, I think you've addressed it, the need that it's not just about bringing different people in, it's about making a difference to the culture in which you operate, and understanding that those people will make a difference.
Absolutely.
As opposed to thinking, right, now you're in, be grateful, shut up, this is how we work.
Exactly. And the other point I was going to make was around gender. So, my line manager was a senior assistant director, and a female, by the version I say she, and she was disrespected by her peer who was a male. But she was part of the bullying of me and disrespect of me. So again, the point I was making about by virtue of the person being black and or brown doesn't mean they're going to come in and make a difference. Similarly, being the fact that someone's gender, i.e. a woman, you'd expect them to a greater or lesser extent, be part of the change and recognising the need for change. That's not always the case, because they sometimes have their own personal agenda, which she had. It was all about her, and it was all about, not being disrespected. And she had a long-standing personal experience of being seen as lesser than. Her father had wanted her to go into typing and secretarial work, where, through her hard work and graft, that's the entry point that she came in at. But ultimately, she rose through the ranks and became this senior executive director. So in short, what I'm saying is people need to be fit for purpose in part of playing their role in creating change. And by virtue of being a woman, and by virtue of being black or brown person, doesn't mean that's going to automatically follow.
Aaron's back with us. Aaron, how you doing?
Sorry about that. I tried to swapped phone. Is this a bit better?
Yeah, it's for now. I just wanted you to finish your thought about
Doubt.
You were saying that you had introduced the notion after Rhodes was full of the historical buildings that you might work with and what your professional relationship should be and moral relationship should be to those buildings. And you were told, we're not talking about that. Don't talk about that. And I'm wondering, first of all, how that ended up. And secondly, because you mentioned that as your moment of doubt, but secondly, how you proceed in a moment where people are saying, well, let's not talk about that.
So I guess, like IJ said, it was talking to professionals, usually from BAME backgrounds, that really supported me, mentored me through this, and kind of gave me other ways I could talk about this event, this topic. The good news story is that I did manage to host it. It was, with a really cool group of young individuals, engineers, who put on an event in Zoom. And it was quite well attended, and we talked about really interesting and difficult topics like decolonizing engineering, the impact of our history. And so it finally did go ahead, but it was only through professionals older than myself who gave me that advice, to just keep at it, keep talking to people, and eventually something will come through. And I guess that was really important for me.
I want to touch on something now for all of you, unless you want to come in on this particular thing of looking different and acting the same. Is there something particular you want to say about that?
Yes. So just when June was making her points, a few things was going through in my mind in terms of I think one message that we need to clearly send out there when we're talking about diversity and inclusion and equality and all of this. The core reason why we're doing this is that we want to have diversity of thoughts on the table, diversity of thoughts in decision making at any level, whether you're a grad or a mid-career or at senior leadership or at exec level. We want to have diversity of thoughts on the table. As Gary said there earlier on, if you have that diversity of thoughts, people come with different lenses. And there's some businesses that do this really well, where they check in with their leadership team to make sure that they haven't hired people that look like them, sound like them, act like them, operate like them, walk like them, talk like them. If you haven't done that check within your leadership team or across your business, you will not have the right voices on the table. You do things the same way over and over, and it's only a matter of time. You will be out of business. It's a business advantage more than anything else. You're doing good for the people that you're working with, but it's also a big advantage to the bottom line of the business overall. So just back to the point in terms of where people have had their voices or have been put on the table, and then just be grateful that you're on the table, don't add anything on there. This is where we do need what I said earlier on. I carry not just my experience, but I carry the voices and experiences of other people, men and women, who have been branded as, there are Black men who have reached out at work. They've been branded as being too loud. They've been branded as being too aggressive. They've been branded and they've been having issues with line management. Sometimes they've been taken up to HR. And if we don't put the conversation on the table to say, some of these people, if you understand their natural makeup and how they and how they are wired. It's just who they are. They come with their whole self to work. They're just passionate when they're raising a topic. They're not aggressive. It might sound to you, because you're a quieter person, as aggressive, but they just bring themselves to work. If you haven't got the right platform of where you bring things like this over and over, you would always be having these issues where we're always going backwards. I think that's why, for me, I'm more I'm passionate and focused about driving solutions. I'm on major projects. I'm in the industry within construction and built environment. I want to see change in my lifetime. Conscious there's been so many people that have gone through well before me, like Andy, like Gary, you've been in the industry well longer than myself. I want to see change in my lifetime. And for the people before coming after me as well, I want them to experience much better than what I've experienced. That's my passion and drive.
I mean, it's interesting what you say there. It's almost, there are bring your daughter to work day, bring your son to work day. It could almost be a bring yourself to work day, where people actually come to work as they are. There's some very important points I think you raised there in terms of understanding diversity, not as a feel-good issue, not as an issue of feeling woke, that much disparaged term, but actually as best practice, and as actually, as well as being the right thing to do, and that your society will crumble if you keep excluding large numbers of people. Look at those countries that do exclude large numbers of people. They're not doing well generally, and they're certainly not doing well kind of psychically, but actually ultimately it's going to help your bottom line. And particularly in a more internationalized moment of globalization, I think back to the moment in Mad Men where they have the chance of some work with a Jewish-owned firm, and they can't find any Jews in the office. And they end up bringing up a kid from the mailroom and just sitting him there. And he has no idea why he's there. And the woman from the company understands exactly what has happened straight away. There are American companies that won't work with you if you don't have a certain percentage of minorities on your board or in your team or whatever. So increasingly you end up looking backward. And so it's in their interest, not just as presentationally, but actually professionally.
Thank you for listening to part 1 of this roundtable discussion on why race matters on major projects. The discussion between Gary, IJ, Aaron and June continues in part 2, which you can find along with other sessions in this series on the Major Projects Association's website and our social media channels.